Maya walked into her advanced history class on a bright Monday morning, her backpack heavy with books and her mind full of excitement. She loved learning about the past and how it shaped the world today. As one of the smartest students in her grade, she had worked hard to earn her spot in this advanced class. The classroom buzzed with quiet conversations as students settled into their seats. Maya chose her usual spot in the second row, right where she could see the board clearly and participate easily. She pulled out her notebook, already filled with neat handwriting from previous lessons, and placed her favorite pen beside it. Mrs. Thompson stood at the front of the class, organizing her papers on the wooden desk. She had been teaching at Lincoln High School for over 20 years, and everyone knew her reputation. Some students loved her classes, while others found them challenging in ways that went beyond just the subject matter. Today's lesson was about the civil rights movement, a topic Maya had been looking forward to for weeks. She had spent the weekend reading extra books from the library, watching documentaries, and even talking to her grandmother about what life was like during those important times in history. As Mrs. Thompson began writing key dates on the whiteboard, Maya raised her hand eagerly. She had prepared several thoughtful questions and wanted to share some interesting facts she had discovered during her research. "Yes?" Mrs. Thompson asked, barely glancing in Maya's direction. "I read that the Montgomery bus boycott lasted 381 days. And it wasn't just about Rosa Parks. There were many other brave people who planned and organized the whole movement. I was wondering if we could talk about some of those other heroes too." The teacher paused, her marker still touching the board. A small smile appeared on her face, but it wasn't the kind that made students feel good. "Well, Maya, I'm sure you have some interesting perspectives on this topic, but let's try to stick to the facts in our textbook for now. We need to cover the material that will be on your test." Maya felt her cheeks grow warm. She looked down at her notebook, confused. Her question had been based on facts she had carefully researched. She had even written down the sources so she could share them with the class. Mrs. Thompson turned to Kevin, a student who hadn't even raised his hand. "Kevin, can you tell us what you know about the bus boycott?" Kevin shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Well, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat and then people stopped riding the buses." "Exactly right," Mrs. Thompson beamed. "That's the kind of clear, objective answer we need in this class." Maya frowned. Her answer had included much more detail and showed deeper understanding, but somehow Kevin's basic response was praised while hers was dismissed. She told herself it was probably just a coincidence, but as the days passed, Maya noticed a troubling pattern. Every time she raised her hand to contribute to class discussions, Mrs. Thompson would find ways to redirect the conversation to other students. When Maya submitted her first essay about the Harlem Renaissance, she received a B- with comments like, "Needs more objectivity," and "avoid emotional language." Maya read her essay again and again, trying to find the emotional language Mrs. Thompson mentioned. Her writing was careful and factual, filled with quotes from primary sources and references to respected historians. Meanwhile, she noticed that other students received higher grades for essays that seemed less detailed and less well-researched. During a lesson about voting rights, Maya tried again to participate. She had spent hours the night before reading about the clever strategies activists used to register voters despite facing enormous obstacles. "The Highlander Folk School played a really important role in training civil rights leaders," Maya said when Mrs. Thompson asked about education during the movement. "They taught people organizational skills and helped them understand their constitutional rights." Mrs. Thompson sighed quietly. "Maya, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, we really need to focus on the main events. These smaller details might be more appropriate for a regular history class where students have more time to explore personal interests." The words hit Maya like a cold splash of water. A regular history class? She had earned her place in this advanced course through hard work and excellent grades. Her standardized test scores were among the highest in the school. Why was her teacher suggesting she didn't belong here? Beside her, her friend Danny shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been watching these interactions for weeks now, and something didn't feel right to him. Danny was naturally quiet in class, preferring to listen rather than speak, but he couldn't help noticing how differently Maya was treated compared to other students. During lunch that day, Maya sat with Danny and their friend Lisa at their usual table near the windows. She picked at her sandwich without much appetite. "I don't understand what I'm doing wrong in history class," Maya said quietly. "I study harder than anyone else. I do all the reading. I even research extra topics on my own. But Mrs. Thompson acts like everything I say is somehow inappropriate." Lisa looked concerned. "What do you mean?" "Every time I try to share something I've learned, she cuts me off or redirects to someone else. And my grades are lower than they should be, even though I know my work is good. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm not smart enough for the advanced class." Danny finally spoke up. "Maya, you're one of the smartest people I know. Last year in regular history, you always had the best projects and the most interesting ideas. There's no way you suddenly got less intelligent over the summer." But Maya wasn't convinced. The constant subtle dismissals were wearing down her confidence day by day. She began participating less in class discussions even when she knew the answers. She started second-guessing her own knowledge and abilities. The pattern continued to emerge in small but significant ways. When the class discussed different historical perspectives, Mrs. Thompson would often preface Maya's comments with phrases like, "Maya has a very specific viewpoint on this," or, "That's one way to look at it, though most historians would disagree." During a unit on Reconstruction, Maya wrote what she considered her best essay yet. She had discovered fascinating primary sources about the economic contributions of formerly enslaved people who became successful business owners and community leaders. Her research included letters, newspaper articles, and government records from the time period. When she got the essay back, she found another B- with comments suggesting her sources were biased and that she should rely more on mainstream historical accounts. Maya looked at her bibliography, filled with documents from university archives and respected academic journals. How could these be considered biased? Meanwhile, she noticed that when other students made simple contributions to class discussions, they were praised enthusiastically. Their essays seemed to receive higher grades even when they contained fewer sources and less original thinking. The most painful part wasn't just the lower grades or the dismissive comments. It was the way Maya began to doubt herself. She started wondering if maybe she really wasn't cut out for advanced coursework. Maybe her research skills weren't as good as she thought. Maybe her writing wasn't as clear as it seemed to her. At home, Maya's parents noticed changes in their usually confident daughter. She spent less time talking excitedly about what she had learned in school. Instead, she seemed tired and frustrated. After each school day, "How are your classes going, honey?" her mother asked one evening as they prepared dinner together. Maya hesitated before answering. "They're okay, I guess. History class is harder than I expected." "Are you having trouble with the material? We could get you a tutor if you need extra help." "No, it's not the material," Maya said slowly. "I understand everything we're studying, it's just, I don't think my teacher believes I belong in the advanced class." Her mother stopped chopping vegetables and looked at her daughter with concern. "What makes you think that?" Maya struggled to explain the feeling that had been growing inside her for weeks. How could she describe the way Mrs. Thompson's tone changed when she spoke to her? How could she explain the pattern of dismissed contributions and lower grades when everything seemed subtle enough that she wondered if she was imagining it? Back at school, other students were beginning to notice, too. Danny had always been observant, even though he rarely spoke up in class. He watched as Maya's enthusiasm gradually dimmed week after week. He saw how Mrs. Thompson responded differently to Maya's questions compared to everyone else's. Lisa started paying closer attention during history class as well. As someone who usually focused on her own work, she hadn't initially noticed the pattern. But once Maya mentioned her concerns, Lisa began observing the classroom dynamics more carefully. During a lesson about the Little Rock Nine, Maya raised her hand to share information about the psychological strength it took for those students to face such hostility every day. She had read interviews with the students conducted years later, where they talked about their coping strategies and support systems. "That's an interesting perspective, Maya," Mrs. Thompson said with that same slight smile. But let's try to keep our discussion focused on the historical facts rather than personal interpretations. Lisa frowned. Maya's comment had been based on documented interviews and psychological research. How was that a personal interpretation? When the boy sitting behind Lisa made a much more general comment about courage, Mrs. Thompson praised it as excellent historical thinking. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Maya's detailed, well-researched contributions were consistently labeled as too emotional, too personal, or too biased. Meanwhile, other students received praise for making far simpler observations. As the weeks passed, Maya's confidence continued to erode. She began arriving to class a few minutes late, hoping to avoid having to participate in the opening discussions. She stopped raising her hand even when she knew she could contribute valuable information to the lesson. Danny and Lisa watched their friend transform from an eager, confident student into someone who seemed to shrink into her seat during every class period. They wanted to help, but they weren't sure how. The situation felt complex and uncomfortable, like something bigger than just typical classroom dynamics. One afternoon, as students filed out of history class, Danny noticed Maya walking slowly, her shoulders slumped with disappointment. She had just received another essay back with a grade that seemed unfairly low for the quality of work she had produced. "Maya, wait up," Danny called, jogging to catch up with her in the hallway. "I think I'm going to ask my counselor about dropping down to regular history," Maya said quietly. "Maybe Mrs. Thompson is right. Maybe I'm just not ready for this level." Danny stopped walking. "Maya, you can't seriously believe that." "I don't know what to believe anymore," Maya replied. "All I know is that nothing I do in that class seems to be good enough." As they stood in the busy hallway with students rushing past them to their next classes, Danny realized that something needed to change. Maya was one of the most capable students he knew, and watching her doubt herself was heartbreaking. But he wasn't sure what he could do to help. The first part of this story shows how discrimination doesn't always happen in obvious ways. Sometimes it appears through small actions, subtle comments, and unfair treatment that makes students question their own abilities. Maya's experience represents what many talented students face when they encounter teachers who have unconscious or conscious biases. What makes this situation particularly difficult is that Maya begins to internalize the unfair treatment, wondering if maybe she really isn't capable of advanced work. This is one of the most harmful effects of discrimination in education. It can make students doubt their own intelligence and potential. The stage is set for what happens next, as Maya's friends begin to recognize the unfair treatment and must decide whether to stay silent or find ways to support their friend and address the injustice they're witnessing. 3 weeks had passed since Maya first considered dropping out of the advanced history class. Each day felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing when her next comment would be dismissed or her work would be judged unfairly. The confident student who had started the semester with such enthusiasm was slowly disappearing. Maya still did all her homework and studied hard for every test, but something fundamental had changed. She no longer looked forward to sharing her discoveries or participating in class discussions. Instead, she sat quietly in her seat, watching other students get praise for ideas that seemed much simpler than the thoughts she kept to herself. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maya walked into the classroom carrying a folder thick with research papers. They were starting a new unit about Reconstruction, the period right after the Civil War when the country tried to rebuild itself. Maya had spent her entire weekend at the library and online, diving deep into this fascinating time in history. She had discovered something amazing during her research. Most people only learned about the basic facts of Reconstruction, how the South was rebuilt and how newly freed people got some rights. But Maya had found incredible stories about former slaves who became successful business owners, teachers, and even politicians. She had read about entire communities that were built from nothing, with schools and businesses that thrived for years. The research had excited Maya so much that she forgot about her recent struggles in class. This was why she loved history, finding these hidden stories that showed how strong and smart people could overcome incredible challenges. As students settled into their seats, Mrs. Thompson announced that they would be discussing the economic Changes during Reconstruction. Maya's heart jumped. This was exactly what she had researched. Maybe today would be different. Maybe her teacher would appreciate the detailed work she had done. Who can tell me about the economy in the South after the Civil War? Mrs. Thompson asked, scanning the room. Maya raised her hand immediately, her folder of research ready on her desk. But Mrs. Thompson's eyes seemed to skip right over her, landing instead on Tyler, a student in the back row. The South was pretty much destroyed, Tyler said with a shrug. They had to start over from scratch. Good start, Tyler. Mrs. Thompson nodded approvingly. Anyone else? Maya raised her hand higher, practically bouncing in her seat with eagerness. She had so much to add to Tyler's basic answer. But again, Mrs. Thompson looked past her to call. On Jessica. I think the government had to help them rebuild everything, Jessica offered. Excellent point, Mrs. Thompson beamed. The federal government did play a crucial role. Maya couldn't contain herself any longer. She had been patient for weeks, watching her contributions get ignored while simpler answers received praise. Her research folder felt heavy in her hands, full of stories that could make this lesson so much richer and more interesting. Mrs. Thompson, Maya said, not waiting to be called on, I found some really interesting information about how people rebuilt their communities during Reconstruction. There were former slaves who started their own businesses and schools. Some became quite successful. The classroom fell quiet. Mrs. Thompson slowly turned to face Maya, and the expression on her face was not welcoming. Maya, the teacher said, her voice carrying a tone that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. I appreciate your enthusiasm for this topic, but we need to focus on factual, objective history here, not emotional stories. Maya felt her face grow hot. But these are facts, she said quietly, holding up her folder. I have documentation from historical archives and university research. These are real people with real accomplishments. Mrs. Thompson walked closer to Maya's desk, her footsteps echoing in the silent classroom. Maya, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what this class requires. We're preparing for advanced placement exams, which means we need to stick to established historical consensus, not personal narratives. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Personal narratives? She had spent hours verifying every fact, cross-referencing sources, and making sure her information came from respected historians and primary documents. How is that personal? I understand about the AP exam, Maya said, her voice starting to shake despite her efforts to stay calm. But these stories are part of established history. They're in academic journals and museum collections. They show how people used education and business skills to build better lives. Mrs. Thompson's expression grew more stern. Maya, I'm going to stop you right there. Your research methods clearly need work if you think these types of sources are appropriate for college-level analysis. Perhaps you would be more comfortable in a regular history class where the academic standards aren't quite so rigorous. Silence in the classroom was deafening. Maya felt as if every eye in the room was staring at her, though she couldn't bring herself to look around and confirm it. The words, aren't quite so rigorous, echoed in her mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Danny, sitting 2 seats away, felt his stomach clench with anger and embarrassment for his friend. He had seen Maya's research before. It was always thorough and impressive. Last year, their regular history teacher had praised Maya's work as some of the best she had ever seen from a high school student. Lisa, who sat across the room, watched, in shock as their confident friend seemed to crumble before their eyes. She had heard Maya talking about her research over lunch yesterday, excited about the stories she had discovered. The work sounded fascinating and well documented, not emotional or unacademic at all. Maya stared down at her folder, feeling tears threaten to spill over. She had worked so hard on this research, staying up late to make sure every fact was correct. Every source was credible. She had been so excited to share what she had learned. Now she felt foolish and small. I'm sorry, Maya whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. That's all right, Mrs. Thompson said in a voice that sounded caring but somehow made Maya feel worse. Learning to distinguish between emotional reaction and academic analysis is a skill that takes time to develop. Not everyone is ready for it at the same pace. Maya began gathering her papers, stuffing them back into the folder with hands that shook slightly. She could feel the curious stares of her classmates and wanted nothing more than to disappear. Now, then, Mrs. Thompson continued, turning back to the whiteboard as if nothing had happened. Let's continue with our discussion of federal Reconstruction policies. For the rest of the class period, Maya sat in silence. She didn't take notes, didn't raise her hand, didn't even look up from her desk. The research that had excited her so much that morning now felt like evidence of her own inadequacy. When the bell finally rang, Maya was the first student out of her seat. She grabbed her backpack and headed for the door, hoping to escape before anyone could say anything to her. "Maya, wait," Danny called, but she was already in the hallway, walking quickly toward the bathroom. Danny and Lisa exchanged worried looks as they packed up their own belongings. "That was really unfair," Lisa said quietly, making sure Mrs. Thompson couldn't hear. "It was more than unfair," Danny replied, his voice tight with anger. "Maya's research is always incredible. Remember her project last year about women in World War II? Even the principal commented on how impressive it was." Lisa nodded. "And did you see all those papers she had? That wasn't emotional reaction. That was serious academic work." As they walked out of the classroom, both students felt a growing sense that something was very wrong with how their friend was being treated, but neither of them knew what to do about it. Maya spent the rest of the lunch period hiding in the library, sitting in a corner where no one could see her. She opened her research folder and looked through the papers that had seemed so important that morning. Pages of notes about successful businesses started by former slaves, documentation of schools and hospitals built by newly freed communities, quotes from historians about the remarkable achievements of people who had overcome incredible obstacles. Had she really misunderstood what made good historical research? Were these stories really just emotional reactions rather than academic facts? Maya had always been proud of her ability to find interesting, lesser-known aspects of history. Her previous teachers had encouraged her to dig deeper, to look beyond the basic textbook facts. But Mrs. Thompson was the advanced placement teacher. She had years of experience preparing students for college-level work. If she said Maya's research wasn't good enough, maybe it really wasn't. By the time Danny and Lisa found her in the library, Maya had made a decision that broke their hearts to hear. "I'm going to ask my counselor about switching to regular history," Maya said without looking up from her folder. "Mrs. Thompson is right, I'm not ready for advanced work." "Maya, that's crazy," Danny said, sitting down beside her. "You're one of the smartest people in our grade." "Being smart isn't the same as being ready for college-level analysis," Maya replied, repeating Mrs. Thompson's words. "Maybe I need more time to develop better research skills." Lisa felt frustrated watching her friend doubt abilities that everyone else could clearly see. "Maya, show me this research Mrs. Thompson said wasn't good enough." Reluctantly, Maya opened her folder and showed Lisa some of the papers. Lisa read through the carefully organized notes, the bibliography of academic sources, the timeline of events with specific dates and locations. "Maya, this is incredible work," Lisa said firmly. "This is exactly the kind of detailed research that colleges want to see. I don't understand why Mrs. Thompson called it emotional." But Maya was no longer listening. The public embarrassment in class had shaken her confidence so deeply that no amount of reassurance from friends could rebuild it quickly. "I just want to be in a class where I can succeed," Maya said quietly. "Where my work is good enough and my teacher believes I belong there." Danny and Lisa sat with their friend in the quiet library, watching her fold up papers that represented hours of careful, intelligent work. They could see that Maya was giving up on something she had once loved, and it felt wrong in a way they couldn't fully explain. As the afternoon wore on, both Danny and Lisa found themselves thinking about what they had witnessed in history class. The more they thought about it, the more they realized that Maya's treatment wasn't just about one bad day or one misunderstanding. Looking back over the past several weeks, they began to see a pattern that they had been too focused on their own work to notice before. Maya's contributions were always dismissed or redirected. Her grades seemed lower than her work deserved. Her questions were treated as interruptions rather than valuable additions to class discussions. Something was definitely wrong, and it wasn't Maya's abilities or her research skills. The problem was bigger than one student struggling with advanced coursework, but recognizing the problem and knowing how to fix it were two very different things. As the school day ended, Maya walked to her counselor's office to discuss changing her schedule. Danny and Lisa watched her go, both feeling helpless and angry. Their friend was giving up on her dreams because of treatment that felt fundamentally unfair. Neither of them knew it yet, but Maya's breaking point would soon become the catalyst for changes that would affect not just their history class but their entire understanding of what it meant to stand up for what was right. The next morning, Maya's empty seat in the front row of the advanced history class felt like a missing piece of a puzzle. She had successfully switched to the regular history class, and while her friends understood her decision, seeing that vacant chair made their stomachs turn with a mixture of sadness and anger. Alex Chen sat in the third row, her notebook open but her mind elsewhere. She had always been the quiet observer in class, preferring to listen and learn rather than speak up. Her parents had immigrated to this country when she was young, and they had taught her the value of keeping her head down, working hard, and not causing trouble. But Alex had been watching the situation with Maya unfold for weeks, and something about it reminded her of stories her own family had shared. Her grandmother had faced discrimination when she first arrived in America, constantly being told that her ideas weren't good enough, or that she didn't understand things properly, even when she was clearly intelligent and capable. As Mrs. Thompson began the day's lesson, Alex found herself paying more attention to her teacher's behavior than to the actual content. Without Maya in the room, would the teacher act differently? Would the subtle patterns Alex had noticed become more obvious, or would they disappear entirely? Today we're continuing our study of Reconstruction, Mrs. Thompson announced, writing key terms on the whiteboard. I want to discuss the challenges faced by the federal government in rebuilding the South. Danny raised his hand. Since Maya's departure, he had been feeling guilty about not speaking up sooner. What about the people who were just freed from slavery? What challenges did they face? Mrs. Thompson nodded approvingly. Excellent question, Danny. The newly freed slaves certainly faced significant obstacles in adapting to their new circumstances. Alex frowned. She remembered Maya asking similar questions and being told to focus on more objective perspectives. When Danny asked essentially the same thing, it was praised as excellent. Lisa, who had also been thinking about Maya's absence, decided to test something. She raised her hand and said, I read that many formerly enslaved people actually started successful businesses and schools during Reconstruction. Some became quite accomplished. Alex held her breath, waiting to see how Mrs. Thompson would respond. This was almost exactly what Maya had tried to share before being humiliated. That's an interesting point, Lisa, Mrs. Thompson said with a smile. Yes, there were certainly some success stories during that time period. It shows the resilience of the human spirit. Alex felt her heart rate increase. The same information that had gotten Maya dismissed as too emotional was now being praised when it came from Lisa. The difference in treatment was so clear that Alex wondered how she had missed it before. As the class continued, Alex began taking notes not about Reconstruction, but about the patterns she was observing. She wrote down how long each student was allowed to speak, what types of responses received praise, and how Mrs. Thompson's tone changed depending on who was talking. The more Alex documented, the more obvious the unfair treatment became. It wasn't just about Maya. Alex realized that she herself had rarely been called on, even when her hand was raised. When she did speak, her comments were often acknowledged briefly before the teacher moved on to someone else. During lunch, Alex found Danny and Lisa sitting at their usual table, both looking dejected. How's Maya doing in her new class? Alex asked, sitting down with her lunch tray. She says it's fine, Lisa replied. But you can tell she's not happy about it. She worked so hard to get into the advanced class. Danny pushed his food around, on his plate. I keep thinking about yesterday. The way Mrs. Thompson treated her was just wrong. Alex took a deep breath. She had never been one to start difficult conversations, but something inside her was changing. I've been watching Mrs. Thompson's behavior more carefully since Maya left, she said quietly. Both Danny and Lisa looked up with interest. I think Maya was right about being treated unfairly. Today, when Lisa said almost exactly what Maya tried to say yesterday, Mrs. Thompson praised it as interesting. But when Maya said the same thing, she was told it was too emotional. Lisa's eyes widened. You noticed that too? Alex nodded. I've been taking notes during class. Not about history, but about how Mrs. Thompson responds to different students. The patterns are really clear once you start looking for them. She pulled out her notebook and showed them what she had written, lists of students' names, the types of comments they made, and the teachers' responses. Even though Alex had only been documenting for one day, the differences were striking. This is like evidence, Danny said, studying Alex's careful notes. That's exactly what it is, Alex replied. My parents always taught me that if you're going to make an accusation, you need proof. Well, here's proof. Lisa felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. What do you think we should do with this? Alex had been thinking about that question all through lunch. Her natural instinct was to stay quiet, to not rock the boat. But watching Maya give up on her dreams because of unfair treatment had sparked something in her that she couldn't ignore. I think we need to document more. One day isn't enough, but if we can show a clear pattern over several days or weeks, then we have something real to present to the administration. Danny leaned forward. You mean like officially report Mrs. Thompson? I mean, we help Maya get back into the class she earned the right to be in, Alex said firmly. And we make sure this doesn't happen to other students. Over the next 2 weeks, Alex became a detective in her own classroom. She sat in the same seat every day, notebook open, carefully recording every interaction between Mrs. Thompson and her students. She noted the questions that were praised versus those that were dismissed. She tracked how much speaking time different students received. She even started timing how long Mrs. Thompson would wait for answers from different students. Danny and Lisa began helping with the documentation. Danny started paying attention to grading patterns, noting when similar quality work received different scores. Lisa began observing Mrs. Thompson's body language and tone of voice, documenting the subtle ways the teacher showed approval or disapproval. What they discovered was both eye-opening and heartbreaking. The unfair treatment wasn't limited to Maya, though she had certainly experienced the worst of it. Alex noticed that she herself was often ignored when she raised her hand. A student named Carlos, whose family had moved from Mexico, received dismissive responses similar to what Maya had experienced. The three friends realized they were witnessing something much bigger than one teacher having a bad day or misunderstanding one student. This was a pattern of behavior that was affecting multiple students and limiting their opportunities to succeed. Meanwhile, Maya was struggling in her new regular history class. While the teacher was kind and the environment was more welcoming, Maya felt like she was moving backward academically. The work was too easy for her, and she found herself bored and unchallenged. She had given up her spot in advanced placement courses, which meant she would have fewer opportunities for college, scholarships, and advanced standing. Every day, Maya walked past her old classroom and felt a mix of sadness and anger. She had worked so hard to earn her place in that class, and now she was sitting in a course that didn't push her to grow intellectually. Alex noticed Maya in the hallways and could see the disappointment in her former classmates' posture and expression. It strengthened Alex's resolve to continue documenting and building a case. One afternoon, after a particularly clear example of biased treatment in class, Alex made a decision that surprised even herself. As students were packing up their books, she approached Mrs. Thompson's desk. Mrs. Thompson, could I ask you something about yesterday's discussion? The teacher looked up with a pleasant smile. Of course, Alex. What's on your mind? Alex's heart was pounding, but she forced herself to speak clearly. Yesterday, when Carlos mentioned the economic impact of railroad construction during Reconstruction, you said his point was too narrow and that he should focus on broader themes. But when Tyler made a similar point about industrial development, you praised it as insightful analysis. I was wondering if you could help me understand the difference. Mrs. Thompson's smile faltered slightly. Well, Alex, context matters in historical discussion. Tyler's comment was more academically appropriate for our level of study. Could you explain what made it more academically appropriate? Alex pressed gently. Both students cited specific examples and connected them to larger historical trends. The teacher's expression grew cooler. Alex, I appreciate your interest in understanding academic standards, but questioning my classroom decisions isn't really appropriate. If you have concerns about your own performance, we can discuss that during office hours. Alex felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't back down. I'm not questioning your decisions, Mrs. Thompson. I'm trying to understand how to be successful in this class. I've noticed that certain types of contributions seem to be valued more than others, and I want to make sure I understand what you're looking for. Mrs. Thompson stood up from her desk, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Alex, I think you may be overthinking things. Just focus on doing your best work and participating constructively in class discussions. As Alex walked away from that conversation, she realized that her suspicions were correct. Mrs. Thompson couldn't explain the difference in her treatment of students because there wasn't a legitimate academic reason for it. That evening, Alex called Danny and Lisa for an emergency meeting at the public library. When they gathered around a quiet table in the back corner, Alex's notebook was thick with documented observations. I think we have enough evidence, Alex said, spreading her notes across the table. 2 weeks of careful documentation showing clear patterns of unfair treatment. Danny and Lisa looked through the pages of detailed observations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. What's our next step? Lisa asked. Alex took a deep breath. Her quiet, conflict-avoiding nature was fighting against what she knew was right. But thinking about Maya sitting in a class that was too easy for her, missing opportunities because of unfair treatment, gave Alex the courage she needed. Tomorrow, I'm going to speak up in class, Alex said. When Mrs. Thompson treats someone unfairly, I'm going to point it out respectfully but clearly, and I'm going to ask Danny and Lisa to back me up. Danny nodded immediately. I'm in. Maya doesn't deserve what happened to her. Lisa agreed as well. It's time someone said something. Alex felt a mix of terror and determination. She had never been the type of person to cause confrontation or draw attention to herself, but watching injustice happen in silence was no longer an option. There's something else, Alex added. I think we should tell Maya what we're planning. She deserves to know that someone is standing up for her. The next morning, before first period, the three friends found Maya at her locker. When they explained what they had discovered and what they planned to do, Maya's eyes filled with tears. You guys have been documenting all of this? Maya asked, looking through Alex's careful notes. We should have spoken up sooner, Danny said. What happened to you wasn't right, and we should have said something. Maya felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced since leaving the advanced class. For weeks, she had wondered if maybe she really was the problem, if her work really wasn't good enough. Seeing her friend's detailed documentation of unfair treatment helped her realize that she hadn't been imagining things. What you're planning to do is really brave, Maya said to Alex. But are you sure you want to take this risk? Mrs. Thompson might retaliate against you. Alex had thought about that possibility extensively. Maya, you took risks every day just by trying to participate in that class. You did excellent work and got punished for it. The least I can do is speak up when I witness injustice. As the eat and bell rang and students headed to their first period classes, Alex walked toward the advanced history classroom with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. In her backpack, she carried 2 weeks' worth of documented evidence and a determination to make sure that talent and hard work were recognized regardless of who demonstrated them. She didn't know exactly what would happen when she spoke up, but she knew that staying silent was no longer an option. Maya deserved better, and so did every other student who had been treated unfairly in that classroom. The quiet observer was about to become an advocate for justice. Alex walked into the advanced history classroom that Thursday morning with her notebook clutched tightly in her hands. Her heart was beating so fast she wondered if other students could hear it. She had spent the previous evening practicing what, she might say, imagining different scenarios and preparing herself for whatever might happen. Danny and Lisa had promised to support her, and knowing they would be there gave Alex the courage she needed. As she took her usual seat in the third row, she glanced around the room and noticed that several other students seemed more alert than usual, as if they could sense that something important was about to happen. Mrs. Thompson entered the classroom, right on time. carrying her usual stack of papers and wearing the same professional smile she showed every day. She had no idea that 3 of her students had spent 2 weeks carefully documenting her teaching methods and preparing to challenge her behavior. "Good morning, class," Mrs. Thompson said, writing the day's topic on the whiteboard. "Today we're going to discuss the end of Reconstruction and its long-term effects on American society." Alex opened her notebook, but instead of preparing to take notes about history, she reviewed the documentation she had gathered. Pages of careful observations, specific examples, and clear patterns of unfair treatment. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her resolve was strong. The lesson began normally, with Mrs. Thompson asking general questions about the previous day's reading. Several students raised their hands and gave basic answers that received the usual positive responses. Then Carlos, the student whose family had moved from Mexico, raised his hand. Alex had been watching how Mrs. Thompson treated Carlos over the past 2 weeks, and she had noticed the same dismissive patterns that Maya had experienced. "Mrs. Thompson, I read that many communities during Reconstruction created their own schools and educational programs. Some of these schools continued operating for decades and became really important centers of learning." Alex held her breath, watching Mrs. Thompson's reaction carefully. "Well, Carlos, that's an interesting observation," Mrs. Thompson said with that familiar tone that Alex had learned to recognize as dismissive. "But we need to be careful about focusing too much on local stories when we're trying to understand the bigger historical picture. Let's hear from someone else about the federal policies during this time." This was the moment Alex had been preparing for. Her heart pounded as she raised her hand, not waiting to be called on. "Mrs. Thompson, I have a question about that response." The teacher looked surprised. Alex rarely spoke up in class, and she had never questioned the teacher's comments before. "Yes, Alex?" Alex's voice was quiet but clear. "Carlos mentioned educational programs during Reconstruction, and you said we should focus on the bigger picture instead of local stories. But last Tuesday, when Tyler talked about local business development during the same time period, you praised it as an excellent example of economic analysis. I'm wondering why local educational programs are considered too narrow, but local business development is considered good analysis." The classroom went completely silent. Students who had been doodling in their notebooks or staring out the window suddenly turned their full attention to what was happening. Even Mrs. Thompson seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. "Well, Alex, context is important in these discussions," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice slightly strained. "Different examples serve different purposes in our analysis." Alex felt her confidence growing. She had prepared for this exact type of vague response. "Could you help me understand what context makes Carlos's example less valuable than Tyler's?" Both students cited specific historical evidence and connected it to larger themes about Reconstruction. Danny, sitting 2 rows behind Alex, felt his own courage building. He raised his hand before Mrs. Thompson could respond. "I have a similar question," Danny said. "I've been keeping track of class discussions for a project, and I've noticed that certain students' contributions are often redirected while others are praised, even when they're making very similar points." Mrs. Thompson's face was beginning to show signs of stress. This was not how her carefully controlled classroom usually operated. "Danny, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I treat all students fairly in this class." Lisa, who had been gathering her own courage throughout this exchange, decided it was time to join her friends. She raised her hand and spoke without waiting to be called on. "Mrs. Thompson, I think what Alex and Danny are trying to say is that there seems to be a pattern in how different students are treated. Some students get extended time to explain their ideas while others are cut off quickly. Some get praised for basic observations, while others are criticized for detailed research." Alex reached into her backpack and pulled out her documentation notebook. Her hands were no longer shaking. "I've been taking notes about classroom interactions for the past 2 weeks. Would it be helpful if I shared some specific examples?" Mrs. Thompson's expression shifted from surprise to defensive. "Alex, I don't think that's appropriate. If you have concerns about your grades or participation, we can discuss that privately." "This isn't about my grades," Alex said respectfully, but firmly. "This is about fairness for all students. Maya was one of the smartest students in this class, and she left because she felt her contributions weren't valued. Looking at my notes, I can see why she felt that way. At the mention of Maya's name, several other students began paying even closer attention. Maya had been popular and respected, and many students had been confused when she suddenly switched to the regular history class. Tyler, the student whose comments had often been praised while similar contributions from other students were dismissed, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was beginning to realize that he might have been receiving preferential treatment without even knowing it. "Mrs. Thompson," said Jessica, another student who rarely spoke up, "I remember when Maya tried to share her research about Reconstruction, and you said it was too emotional. But her research looked really thorough and academic to me." More students began nodding and murmuring in agreement. The carefully controlled classroom atmosphere was changing as students found the courage to voice observations they had kept to themselves. Mrs. Thompson looked around the room and realized that she was facing something she had never encountered before, a classroom full of students who were questioning her authority and calling attention to her behavior. "Class, I think, we need to get back to our lesson," she said, trying to regain control. "These kinds of discussions aren't productive for your learning." But Alex wasn't ready to back down. All the weeks of watching unfair treatment, all the documentation she had carefully gathered, all the courage she had built up, it all came together in this moment. "Mrs. Thompson, with respect, I think this discussion is very productive. We're learning about fairness, documentation, and standing up for what's right. Those seem like important lessons." Alex opened her notebook and began reading from her carefully recorded observations. On Monday, October 15th, Carlos raised his hand to discuss economic development during Reconstruction. He was allowed to speak for approximately 30 seconds before being redirected. On the same day, Tyler made a similar point about economic development and was allowed to speak for over 2 minutes, with follow-up questions from you asking him to elaborate. The specific documentation was powerful. Alex continued reading examples, each one showing clear patterns of different treatment for different students. On Wednesday, October 17th, when I tried to share information about women's roles during Reconstruction, I was told the topic was outside our focus area. But on Friday, October 19th, when Bradley discussed men's roles in politics during the same time period, it was praised as insightful historical analysis. As Alex read her documented observations, other students began recognizing their own experiences in the patterns she described. Some realized they had been receiving preferential treatment, while others recognized that their contributions had been consistently undervalued. Mrs. Thompson's face had grown red, and she seemed to be struggling with how to respond to such detailed, specific evidence of her behavior. "Alex, I think you're misinterpreting normal classroom management," she said, but her voice lacked the confidence it usually carried. Danny stood up from his seat, something he had never done before in any class. "Mrs. Thompson, it's not just Alex's observations. I've been noticing the same patterns. Maya left this class because she felt her work wasn't good enough, but I saw her research. It was better than anything I've ever produced, and my work gets praised regularly." Lisa also stood up. Maya was excited about learning and always came to class prepared. She didn't leave because she couldn't handle the work. She left because she was being treated unfairly. One by one, other students began standing up as well. Not all of them, but enough to show that Alex, Danny, and Lisa weren't alone in their observations. Tyler, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "I think I owe Maya an apology. I've been getting credit for ideas that weren't really better than hers. I just didn't realize it was happening." The classroom had transformed completely. What had started as Alex's individual act of courage had become a collective moment of honesty and accountability. Mrs. Thompson looked around at the students standing in her classroom and seemed to realize that she could no longer deny what was happening. The evidence was too clear, and too many students had witnessed it. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "we should continue this conversation with the administration present." Principal Rodriguez arrived at the classroom 20 minutes later, along with the school counselor and the department head. Alex presented her documentation, Danny and Lisa shared their observations, and several other students contributed their own experiences. The investigation that followed was thorough and fair. Alex's detailed notes provided a clear timeline of discriminatory behavior. Other students came forward with similar experiences from previous semesters. The pattern was undeniable. Mrs. Thompson was placed on immediate administrative leave, while the school board conducted a full review. The investigation revealed that Maya wasn't the first talented student to leave Mrs. Thompson's advanced classes under similar circumstances. Within a week, Maya received a phone call from Principal Rodriguez, personally inviting her back to the advanced history class with a new substitute teacher. Maya was hesitant at first, worried about facing more of the same treatment. But when Alex, Danny, and Lisa came to her house that evening to tell her what had happened, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. "You guys really stood up for me?" Maya asked, looking through Alex's documentation with amazement. "We stood up for fairness," Alex replied, "and we should have done it sooner." Maya returned to the advanced history class the following Monday. The new teacher, Mr. Patterson, was enthusiastic about hearing different perspectives and encouraging original research. On Maya's first day back, she shared some of the reconstruction research that had been dismissed weeks earlier. "This is fascinating work, Maya," Mr. Patterson said after hearing her presentation. "Have you considered submitting this to the state history competition? This level of original research is exactly what they're looking for." The classroom that had once felt hostile and unwelcoming became a place where all students could contribute their ideas and have them evaluated fairly. Alex discovered that she actually had a lot to say when she felt safe to speak up. Danny became more confident in sharing his own research. Lisa developed a passion for historical analysis that she never knew she had. But the changes went beyond just one classroom. The school administration implemented new policies requiring bias training for all teachers. They created anonymous reporting systems so students could raise concerns about unfair treatment without fear of retaliation. Regular classroom observations were instituted to ensure that all students received equal opportunities to participate and succeed. Maya not only returned to the advanced class but thrived in the new environment. Her research about Reconstruction was indeed submitted to the state competition, where it won second place. The recognition helped her earn a full scholarship to her dream college. Alex, who had once been too quiet to speak up in class, was elected to the student council on a platform of fairness and inclusion. She used her position to continue advocating for policies that ensured all students had equal opportunities to succeed. Danny and Lisa both discovered new confidence in their academic abilities when they knew their contributions would be fairly evaluated. They went on to take additional advanced courses and pursue challenging academic goals they had never considered before. Mrs. Thompson eventually returned to teaching after completing extensive bias training and working with a mentor teacher for a full semester. The experience forced her to confront her own unconscious prejudices and change her teaching methods fundamentally. The story of what happened in that history classroom spread throughout the school and even to other schools in the district. Students learned that they had the power to document unfairness and advocate for change. Teachers became more aware of their own potential biases and worked harder to treat all students equitably. 6 months after Alex first stood up in that classroom, Maya gave a speech at the school's awards ceremony about the importance of courage, documentation, and standing up for justice. As she looked out at the audience, she saw Alex sitting in the front row smiling with pride. "Change doesn't happen when good people stay silent," Maya said in her speech. "It happens when ordinary students find extraordinary courage to speak up for what's right." The transformation that began with one student's courage to stand up continued to ripple through their school community, proving that when people choose to act against unfairness, real and lasting change is possible.